very first episode of the Salt Lick Podcast with Lesley Chesterman and David McMillan, a show that will bring you the front to back, the back to front, ins and outs, the good, the bad, the ugly, and a lot more of the food world. You can see we're still thinking of a tagline.
Hi, Lesley. This is David McMillan. So we think it's time to have real uncensored conversations about what we eat, why we eat it, and how we can all eat better. We want to talk about history, current events, the news in your city. We want to look at all kinds of aspects and really get to know you.
The Salt Lick Podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform. You know where they are, and let's get started. Where do you pull that? Okay.
Okay, Mazel Tov, episode 1 of the Salt Lick. Whenever you are ready, in 3, 2...
Good. So here we go. Welcome to the Salt Lick Podcast. I'm Lesley Chesterman. I'm a food writer, author, broadcaster, pastry chef, former restaurant critic, and I'll let my co-host, my friend, and for the purposes of this podcast, my rival, introduce himself.
Thank you, Lesley. My name is David McMillan. I'm a former chef. I'm a farmer, viticulturalist. I co-founded a few restaurants in Montreal that people have enjoyed, including the Joe Beef Group that I sold a few years ago. Today, I run Hayfield Farms and Airbnb. I'm a cookbook author. We're putting for sale right now a new book on wine called Spilled Natural Winemakers Stories and Recipes. And we'll talk more about that later. But here we go.
Yeah, we're going to start off talking a little bit about ourselves because some people know who we are. We are based in Montreal, so a lot of people know us here. People hopefully know us elsewhere too, but I thought it'd be great to start just, give us a little bit of an idea. We are definitely people who've been in the food world for a long time, and I wanted David to start off a little bit about his beginnings. And then we'll maybe talk about how we ran into each other something like 30 years ago. So, David, you start by telling us a little bit about yourself. Let's say when you started cooking, like how did you get into the restaurant game?
So I was a kid in Montreal. I grew up on the West Island of Montreal. And, I was struggling in and out of CEGEP, which we call college here. And I got a job at this French restaurant. And I thought nothing of it back in those days. I just thought that, maybe I'll, just kind of work here 2 days a week and see what's going on. I was already living in an apartment and kind of semi-dropped out of CEGEP college. And I started working in this French restaurant in Sainte-Anne-de-Bellevue on the waterfront called the Péché Mignon with these two eccentric French chefs who are quite skilled and talented menu writers and cooks. And I quite enjoyed it very much. They were passionate. They worked hard. The restaurant was clean. They were exploring a creative side inside of themselves. They were having long discussions with the staff about what I believed at that time to be indulgent almost. I didn't understand why they were talking about, putting grapefruit segments on a sole carpaccio and with the right oil. And, so I was watching all this from afar and I was kind of like what they're doing. Right. So I started working there a little bit and, they were quite, I think being from the French system, really good at grifting young people into, working hard for them. Right. They were very good at you're very good at this. You're showing a lot of talent. I thought it was positive reinforcement back in those days, but today I see it because I've done it myself over the years now. As basically, I was recruited or groomed into the kitchen world by these guys who had as well been recruited or groomed into the kitchen world. But at that time, I was finding I was having trouble finding myself as a cook and, finding myself as a person. I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd considered going into real estate, going into forestry, going into, backcountry woodsman and, all kinds of nonsense. And then all of a sudden, I found this thing called French cooking. They'd lent me a couple of books and I'd read them in my apartment and, that's where it all started. I quickly worked with them and for a summer and, they said maybe I should go work downtown at this other restaurant. And the big move for me was going to Le Caveau, which was a restaurant behind the McCord Museum in Montreal that had been there since.
Very classical French restaurant.
Gorgeous old building, classical French, really a brigade, a proper brigade in the kitchen. All the stereotypes of a French restaurant, the maîtresse d'hôtel with her hair tied up in a bun and a chignon and a little lace apron. Her second in command, a German woman called Ursula, who is, again, right out of central casting to be the dining room manager. Back in those days, there was no computers in the dining room. All the bills were written by hand. So she would stand there at a pulpit, with perfect handwriting, writing all of the bills that the customers ate. And what was amazing at that restaurant at that time was that it was really a power restaurant, right? It was open for breakfast at 7 a.m. My first job that I got there was 7 a.m. And basically the second day I was cooking for Parizeau. I was cooking for Danielle Johnson, Pierre-Marc Johnson. There was 15 men in that dining room for breakfast at 7 a.m. And it was basically, Paul Desmarais. It was the cream of the business world and political world, and the Dean of McGill,
the power elite
and all this
of Montreal.
It was the elite old suit men that were up early having a little business breakfast before they got to work. It was fascinating.
It's right downtown too, so it was really the spot in the middle of downtown Montreal.
We used to do not many people for breakfast, but like anywhere from 15 to 30. But it was a very important service for them because of the power that was in that room. And, I believe I really learned to cook working there at lunch. And at that time, we used to get hammered at lunch. We'd do 180 to 250
I thought you meant
customers.
you were drinking at lunch. Okay, you got hammered. You got slammed. You got slammed.
We get slammed so hard, we would do 150 people in 45 minutes. People would roll in there at 12:10 and they had to be gone at 1:05 max, paid and out, right? And so it was a very aggressive, violent service. Not violent physically, but just like,
mentally.
We had wait 45 minutes to serve 150 people a la carte. It's not no joke. And I think I learned the sense of urgency there. And at that time too, it's not that long ago, really, if you think about it, but 40 years ago, or 30 something years ago, we would sell 18 liters of brains at lunch. Like, people ate brains and we sold it. It was $18 and we sold a ton of them. Like, when we put brain in a pan, we put 12 orders in a large Lyonnaise skillet with basically half a pound of butter. We'd finish that with lemon and capers. And, we put a generous portion of brain on your plate. People ate liver. We would, we'd sell 40 slices, kidneys, and I was talking to a friend the other day who's in the sushi business. But back then, we used to buy bluefin tuna, for the lunch fish special, right? And bluefin tuna at that time was the cheapest fish at the, fish market. It was like $1.99 a pound. It was cheaper than mackerel, right?
Would you cook it through? Would you saute it? What would you do?
Yeah. So what we do was, there was no question, and nobody, we're 10 years away at this point from anybody eating raw fish or even rosé, pink salmon. Forget it. So Danielle, the chef, I always just say, tuna is a great dish, but you have to serve a big portion. And we always did it. It was boiled à la grecque. So it was a beautiful, broth of carrot, onion, celery, fennel, coriander seeds, good oil, good lemon juice, maybe sometimes a splash of red wine vinegar as well. But we used to have to taste that courbouillon, right? We had to taste it. It had to be delicious. A couple bay leaves, of course, thyme, yada, yada, whatever, the drill. And we would basically poach big slabs of bluefin tuna in that. And then we'd serve that in a bowl with a bit of that broth, the carrots and the onions on top, and 2 boiled potatoes on the side, pommes de terre château, they call them, pommes de terre tournées, or we used to call them pommes à l'eau, right? Because we would basically always have this pot of, turned potatoes. they're delicious too. You know, I find like now in my older years, like I love eating a turned boiled potato with my dinner. It's kind of.
Do chefs know how to turn a potato today? We'll talk about that.
Yeah, we can get on that. They do. It's becoming hot again.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah. So, I worked there for, on and off while I was going to cooking school. I used to wake up at I loved it that summer so much working there that I basically applied to go to cooking school and got in quite easily. And so I'd ride my bike at 6 a.m. to go to Le Caveau. I would do breakfast, from 6:30 to 7:45. I had a special deal with the chef that I could leave at 7:45. So I'd get back on my bike. I'd ride my bike all the way to Sherbrooke Street to the cooking school. And then I'd do my cooking school day. And I'd get out of school at cooking school around, 2:45. And by that time, I'd con my teachers to let me out early because they knew that I was going straight to work after and I was baroque. And then I would go and I would do the night shift, right? So then I would work with a whole other team because there was that morning team, right? And then there was a night team. The night team was a bit younger and they were a bit like, from better restaurants, perhaps. Like the executive chef was this guy called Daniel Chandelmeyer, which was an Alsatian guy out of the Lyon School of Chefs. And, the kitchen, the day team was like the murderer's row of old cooks,
right.
It was beautiful. They were really skilled people. There was a man there, I remember, called Maurice Notin, who was Hugh Hefner's executive chef during the Playboy Club era. So he was the first jet set kind of chef in North America who was operating Hugh Hefner's Playboy clubs in all major cities at that time, right?
There was one in Montreal at one point.
Yeah, and he was, he used to fly privately and go to all of them. And what was funny about Maurice is he was what they called un enfant de l'assistance, right? So he grew up basically as an orphan in Lyon and was taken in, as was the policy back in those days. If you're basically an orphan, sometimes restaurants would basically snatch you from the streets or make a deal with your caregiver that they would room and board you and you would learn the restaurant business. And, he was one of those people, right? He worked at La Mère Brasier as a child. I think he grew up in that kitchen. And, by the time that kid was, 19, 20 years old, he was a powerhouse of a cook. Yeah. And at that time, people like Hugh Hefner, if you were looking for someone, to run French restaurants in North America, you would look to people like Maurice Notin to do these projects, right? It was a fertile ground to go get great cooks,
Yeah, because of course, back then, if you had a great restaurant, it was French.
Absolutely.
And if you no-brainer, yeah.
If you look today, if you actually go on Google and you look at the Playboy Club menus, they're quite sophisticated. It was Dover Sole, Chateaubriand Boucoutière, Filet Mignon Rossini, Carré d'Agneau Vert Pré.
For like $12. Yeah.
Yeah. But the menus were like for real.
Right.
Pomme soufflé.
Right. Wow.
There was no, we got away with murder today in what we call French restaurants, But
he must have had great stories. Did he tell you amazing?
He didn't.
Oh, he didn't share. He didn't share.
He looked like he'd been in a knife fight. He had 2 major big scars right across his face, basically from his forehead to his cheek. And he was a hard man, he was a very tough man. And I worked right next to him. I would basically do small vegetable plates while he would take on basically the whole dining room on meats. He would cook all the liver, all the brains, all the steaks, all the
kidneys.
He would take on 175 portions of protein on 2 6-burner stoves by himself during lunch every day. And the sauces and the preparation for that. I was just like, I stood in between the chef and him, putting vegetables on plate, trying not to, have 3rd-degree burns all over my arms and legs because, it was a hot, greasy station. But
that restaurant also had amazing service. And when I reviewed it years ago, it was the first time I think I ever had a beef tartare prepared tableside. And they made a great tartare. And it was the kitchen, but it was also the ambiance in the dining room, the servers. Everybody there was from France.
It was a beautiful room. It had stained glass, it was a carpeted room. It had mahogany. The boss's office was like, he had a real office with a mahogany desk and the little green light over his blotter to write on, right? We used to still take all the reservations by hand. We had the big reservation book and, the handwriting was perfect in it. Our paychecks were written by hand. It was really special. I was really lucky lucky to, the waiters, you had aprons down to your ankles. It wasn't down to your tibia, mid tibia. It was like if the apron had to basically be as long as your cuffed pant.
Did you wear a chef's hat? Did you have a tall hat?
No, not in the kitchen because the hood was a bit low. So, we wore the little paper hats in the kitchen, but we were wearing 100% cotton, Bragard chef coats and 100% cotton Bragard aprons. And we all wore the pantalon pied de poule, the checkered pant they call.
What about the security shoes? Do you remember the steel cap security shoes?
Yeah, the jalnais they were called, I believe. Yeah, we wore those. And
they're probably smart, though. I mean, as awful as they were. I mean, they would always say, well, what if a can falls on your foot? You'd be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it was a great place to learn, and I think that those were, I've said this maybe to you, privately, but I hate to say it, but like one of the best restaurants I've ever worked in my career was the first restaurant that I've ever worked in my career. It was that restaurant. Those guys were Bacusian, Lyonnais cooks, and they never said they did la cuisine du marché. I didn't know what that was, right? And every day Daniel would call the market. He would order a whole bunch of stuff, like kidneys, like say the kidney main course on the lunch menu. All that it would say rognon de veau, or with Madeira sauce.
Right.
That's all that it was. But that kidney with Madeira sauce could have morels with it on Monday, white asparagus with it on Tuesday. I've even seen it be served actually, and it made sense and it was delicious with like perfectly nice butter sautéed taillon chunks of avocado. So like kidneys with Madeira sauce and avocado, but they made it French and they made it work and it made sense. It was la cuisine du marché. That day, avocados were dirt cheap. They were fresh and they were such good cooks working there that, they could make anything work and academically too, right? It wasn't like, oh, this is stupid. It works. I was like, I get it. I get why this is good. It would braised fennel every Thursday. Every Thursday we would get 2 bushels of blue crabs and make, blue crab soup, right? I hated that day kind of because I was the guy who had to crush all the carcasses and, push all of the bisque, the crab bisque through the tamis, the cheesecloth, make sure it had no grit or sand. And if it did, oh my God, I'd get yelled at and stuff. But, as much as I got yelled at there and as hard as those people were,
you learned a lot.
I learned a lot, but it was dosed with real mentorship and real caring. Like they cared about how I slept, how I ate,
right.
What my plan was next. Like, let's say we'd agreed to disagree to agree that I wanted to cook. They were going to get me there quickly. It wouldn't be easy, but they would follow through and care, right? And they did. And, they all proved to, 30 years after I'd walked out of that restaurant, I'd still got messages of encouragement, visits, handwritten letters of, we're proud of you,
So real mentorship. I mean, not just a boss. Really, people, like you said, they cared. I mean,
they did. They all cared because
letters?
They said, we've been through this kind of French system, love it or hate it.
Yeah.
It's hard, but we made this decision to, this is what we are. And you're now young and you're coming into our fold.
You're one of us.
and you're one of us, and don't worry, we're gonna.
You've got your back.
We got your back. We're also going to tell you when, you suck. And, I remember once, I think, it wasn't, many years after, but I think I'd been at Globe a little bit after that. And, I think I was in a creative mood. I was quite young and maybe dumb, right? And I'd just come back from the West Coast, right? So I think like you'd probably written, or Helen Rochester or some food writer had maybe put an article in the paper about some dish I did. I forget, could have had pineapple on it for all I know.
Right.
And I remember they called me at 1:00, like 1:30 after their lunch service. And I could hear all of them in the kitchen saying, David, tu vas nous donner la recette avec les ananas. And you could hear them all laughing in the background. It's like, oh, David, you're going to give us that recipe with the pineapples, huh? And basically they were,
totally
like,
making fun of you.
What are you doing?
Right.
Like, have you lost your way? Do you need to come back for a couple of weeks?
Right.
To refresh your brain, or for us to.
You never put a pineapple on anything again. Yeah. Yeah.
I think I'd made, now that I recall, I think I'd made a pineapple ketchup to go with a crispy sweetbread. Which kind of sounds good.
Well, wait, that doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah, I don't know. They were not having it.
Yeah, no,
at all.
No. Yeah, but they put avocados with the kidneys.
But it made sense.
But it made sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it's okay. So after Le Caveau, where'd you go next? Did they send you somewhere? Did you decide on your own?
Yeah. Then it was like, back and forth from France and stuff like that. And
because cooking school, you had to go on a stage in France.
Yeah, I actually went on one before, on my own. Right, I went to. My chef said you should, you can work here this summer, or you can. My advice to you is you go somewhere.
Go see my cousin. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I ended up in Burgundy. Right, I ended up at some country bumpkin restaurant in Auxey-Dorès near Meursault, basically learning the real, true cuisine bourguignonne with basically my chef was 83 years old. I think I was 21, and he'd basically walked at the end of the Second World War from Italy with his wife to the village,
right,
of which he ended up buying a restaurant in and having a very long career in, right? Mm-hmm. And so, they were all kind of shell-shocked and traumatized about, the things that they'd been through. Right. Snails for them was a specialty that you eat in Burgundy that we all, have a affection for, that we love so much. But, for him, eating snails.
Survival.
Was, like he goes, I've eaten snails, like out of the side of the road gutter, raw, while hiding from headlights on the road. And I remember Bernard Loiseau I don't know if you remember Bernard Loiseau at his famous 3 Michelin star restaurant in Saulieu.
I ate there last summer.
Had become famous because he was doing a recipe of escargot aux orties. He was using, it was basically at the beginning where chefs had begun foraging again. And Bernard Loiseau was doing snails with, how do you say ortie in English?
They're ortie
nettles.
Or nettles.
Stinging nettles.
Yeah, stinging nettles.
So he'd been getting some press about his recipe of stinging nettles and snails. And I remember how angry the chef was where I was working, Monsieur Claire. He just couldn't, he goes, because Bernard was always kind of outspoken and rambunctious and
very much
spoke 100 miles an hour and was very much in love with filling his restaurant, but also manipulating the media to do so.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
And I remember the chef was red in the face and furious and just storming in the kitchen. I was just doing my best to I was prepping the sauces, cleaning the stove, prepping the lunch service, and he was just beside himself. It's like, that son of a bitch, he doesn't understand, what that even means. He sees it as a vehicle to his success, and I've never wanted to hear that word again, ortie, and stinging nettles. And I've blocked out of my mind that they've existed for, the better part of 50 years. And that this guy, this hack, he was just losing it. He said, I don't know, I've had stinging nettle soup and made it since then, and it's fine. But I understand his trauma
Yeah.
I guess I don't know what it is to be hungry for, 20 days and then that your only meal is that. I get it.
Yeah. It's like Jerusalem artichokes. A lot of French people, that's what they ate during the war. So you see it in all these high-end restaurants. I can't stand Jerusalem artichokes. But, French people are like, no way. That's what we ate during the war. That's not food for a fancy restaurant. And I can understand, the people are traumatized by these things. They don't want to see them again. Of course, he's right, But of course, there's also the chefs just are always looking for new ingredients. So Bernard Loiseau, local ingredient, it's probably not that dumb.
Yeah. It made sense at that time, but my memory was that restaurant, he was so upset. It's so funny. I think after that, then I came back to Montreal, and then I went back to France, and I worked in another. I'll speed this up because it's a heinously long and arduous,
well, you're not
boring
26 years old, so there's stuff to tell. You see?
Yeah, but I think this is not a very long podcast, right? I don't know.
We can go.
Then I'd worked at Montreal. I came back. I worked at a maybe I think it was a 1 Michelin star restaurant in Dijon, but it had a really high what they call Goy Milot rating, and at that time, the Goy Milot guide was as important as the Michelin guide. Yeah. So it was one thing to have a Michelin star, right? But to have I think it was 18.5 out of 20 on the Goy Milot was a huge score.
That's high.
There was 3 Michelin star restaurants that didn't have 16.5, right? So I was at this and Goy Milot was more centered to modernity, perhaps, creativity, and let's say the new French cooking, right? I think there was extra points awarded for, truly creative individuals who were, quite out there. The highest Goy Milot score at that time was Pierre Gagnère at 19.5 points and 3
Marc
Michelin
Vera,
stars.
later on, high score.
Sure, yeah. And in Saint-Étienne, but the food at this Thibert restaurant was just it was like a rocket ship. I'd never, it was dehydrated vegetables on veal. We were serving, eel in meat sauces, and I could go on and on and on. Just some of the artful presentations. He was friends with Pierre Gagnère. They had this mutual respect for each other. Thibert had been the chef, I think, too, at Georges Blanc when Georges Blanc went from 2 to 3 Michelin stars, or at a pier, something like that. From what I'm not, you have to fact check that maybe, but I think that was the urban legend there. Right. And that was pretty much it. That was a cool experience. That was a very hard kitchen. The level of screaming and mental abuse and all the young chefs that were there were basically there for to have it on their CV. They all saw it as a stepping stone. Nobody wanted to be there. I don't know if you've been to Dijon, but it's a nice place to visit, but living there just sucks. And no disrespect to the good people of Dijon, but I found it miserable to live there, and I found it miserable to work there. I found it dangerous at night when I was walking home. I got chased back often, and I remember rolling into Dijon. I struggled with my weight as a child, but I would roll into to that restaurant. Whenever I rolled into France, I'd show up 260, like a tubby, and I'd come back 180.
Staff meals in Michelin-starred restaurants are terrible.
But that's it. But I would eat chocolate,
right?
Anything I could get my hands on, I ate it. I must have putting in 4,000 calories a day of just food, right? And no matter how many calories I ate, I was still shedding 8-10 pounds a week. Because that was we'd be in the kitchen shaved at 7 a.m.
Yep. And you do 2 services back then.
Yeah, we'd get 1 hour off, basically, smoke them if you got them, or just sit in the park and smoke 20 cigarettes, as fast as you can. Not 20, but 4 or 5. Right. And then back at work. So it was 7 a.m. till midnight, often 1 a.m.
Yep.
Right? And so that was difficult. And everything, had no friends there. Not one person was friends. There was zero camaraderie. It was a hard service. It was a hard lunch. The chef was hard. It was depressing. I left that restaurant quite broken. Like, like when I got back to Montreal, I had to pick myself up, and I was like still wondering, is this for me? That had been like a really difficult year, and it was tough. And then I think we discovered our mutual friend maybe at the same time, young Nikki.
Yeah, Nicolas Jongleur. Yeah,
yeah. I didn't know where to work at that time. There was some kind of job offers in the pipes, but the Caveau kind of wanted me back. But after I'd seen this like really creative cooking in Dijon, I was like kind of didn't want to go back to Le Caveau.
Right.
And I knew that I'd be like ninth banana. I wouldn't even be like second or third. I'd be like.
You paid your dues. You wanted to go somewhere else. Did you want to be the chef? Did you want to be in charge?
A little bit.
Yeah.
But at that time, weirdly, like, I'd seen like, I'd gotten a taste of what was going on in France on the creative side. And now I understood the Michelin Guide. I all of a sudden, I was starting to read a lot about wine. Like I was very interested by wine at that point.
And you were surrounded by it. Did you?
Yeah,
we talked about this once. Were you telling me, because this happened when I was in France? Were you telling me that when you were lonely, you started drinking because you were surrounded by wine and you were curious and you had when you had time on your hands, why not?
Well, sure. Look, I'll make a. So in Acclaimed, the first restaurant that I worked in Burgundy, there was one business. And it was the restaurant that I worked at.
Right.
There wasn't two.
Right.
There was one.
No
place,
nightclubs. No.
Nothing. No. There's 400 people still to this day. I don't think a new house has been built there in 1,000 years.
Is the restaurant still there?
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
And but it's the physical building is still there, but it's not much.
It's a kebab place. Yeah.
They have nachos now, I think.
Yeah, nachos.
But. Yeah, that was like the only other businesses in a viticultural town like Acclaimed is the winemakers, right?
The caviste, yeah.
Not even caviste.
Just the winemakers. Oh, the properties, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, if I had a day off, I would basically go across the street and I would see Michel Prunier, and, he would be working in the cellar, and he knew that I was the kid from Canada with the chef, and we would taste, a bunch of things. And he said, "Oh, you like this, huh? You should go taste my friend, Bruno." And I would go to Bruno's, and Bruno would make me a sandwich, and maybe I'd help him like shovel some stone into his driveway. And then I would go to this other place because she had peacocks, and then she would, make me taste wine and let me kind of play with the peacocks or feed the peacocks. So I had this like weird country village life where everybody in that village was in the wine trade. So we would, basically taste wine, talk about the weather, talk about food, and that was it. Right. And, when I would go for walks, people, there was a Roman camp up at the top of the hill, and, an old Roman camp, there's vestiges or the old piles of stone where there was a Roman camp. So I'd go for these walks, and then I started understanding the viticultural map, right? Where things were, why white wine was where white wine was, where red wine, was what's premier cru, what was grand cru. I started understanding the erosion. Acclaimed had an erosion problem. It was so on. And when I got to Dijon, that guy, Mr. Thibert, who I worked for, was well known as being one of the greatest blind tasters in Burgundy. He couldn't taste any wine, outside of Burgundy. Never did. Couldn't care less. No idea there was wine in the New World. Couldn't care less. But
what about Bordeaux? Did he mention
garbage to him?
Garbage to him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Not even close.
Not even yet.
No. Like he struggled even with South Burgundy. He said, "I shouldn't exist." People today say, "I love Gamay, I love Beaujolais." He was like, "Yeah,
fuck that.
no,
Yeah, no."
You can't even, he said he would say stuff like, "You can't even cook with that wine."
Oh God, that's so
It'll
French.
ruin the recipes.
So French.
Let alone drink it. He would say racist things too. The racism,
sure.
out of his mouth was just wine's good for Arabs. I was like, no.
Oh yeah, no, unbelievable. Yeah, yeah.
Poor guy. But anyway, Yeah, so there was always that education thing, right? So
yeah, so when you got back to Montreal, was it a bit of a shock there, and you didn't want to go back to Le Caveau, so.
But then my choice was Lim. Remember the restaurants back then?
There were Italian restaurants and French restaurants, and a couple of Chinese.
The French restaurants were like La Lucarne.
Yeah,
I was like, I don't want to work here.
Right.
Right.
It's like a bistro. Yeah.
And then there was La Lou.
Leal.
That was all junk.
Leal,
I worked at Leal as a kid, as a stagiaire in cooking school. I did a stage there. And,
Yeah, La Lou. Was La Lou
it was
open
like working
then?
in a
Yeah.
submarine. It was a basement with 6-foot ceilings, and it smelled like a septic tank. And it was just the worst. No, so there was nothing,
Drawing you
there
in.
was nothing interesting.
What
And then
year
one
was this
day-
about? What do you think? Would you say like early 90s?
Something like that. Yeah. I did 91 or something. And then there was this book. There was this guidebook before any guidebooks ever existed. It was actually a blue book, and it was Canada's 100 best restaurants.
Ooh.
Before the Canada's 100 best restaurants.
Before
of
the
today,
world's
right?
50 best or anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Some guy with a yacht had published this book for rich people of 100 Canada's 100 best restaurants. And, Toronto looked cool. Scaramouche was a cool restaurant, and there was North 44. Mark
Oh my God, North
McEwen was
44, Mark McEwen,
ahead of his time.
Yeah.
So was Keith Froggatt at Scaramouche. Still to this day, it's a great restaurant. So there was cool things going on in Toronto, and there was cool things going on out west. And now with this guidebook, you could basically read everyone's menu. Right? It's the first time, because don't forget, this is pre-Google, pre-cell phones.
For sure.
Information.
You needed a book. You needed a guide. Yeah.
Yeah, it was unless if you wanted to read someone's menu, you had to go to the restaurant, read it outside.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And we did. We used to stand in front of
to New York
restaurants
to
and
take
read their
pictures of
menu.
Jean Georges menus with a disposable telephone, a camera.
Imagine. Right.
I looked through the window to see the food that he was serving.
Right. Or you'd watch a PBS show that maybe you'd see a famous chef cooking. Yeah.
But then there was Le Cintra.
Yes,
on one of the pages
Italian.
of the book, and there was this picture of angry Nicolas Jongleur. And
Le Centra, right. Okay, that was his first, sorry. There was
beautiful menu. The menu was published, and I was like, holy crap, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Ravioles de langoustine au yogourt à la ciboulette. And I was like, yes, that. I want to cook that. Right. So in English, Icelandic rock lobster ravioli with chived yogurt dressing. I was like, I'm down. Yep. And then the rest of the menu read equally beautiful. Jarret de veau à la jambe de bois cuisiné pour 2 personnes. Veal shank for 2. Cooked on the bone, for 2 people. And he did beautiful cooking.
Yeah.
And that's where all of a sudden I'd learned the word bourgeois cooking, la cuisine bourgeoise.
Yes.
And I didn't understand what that was really. Right. And it was basically, Nicolas said this is Alain Chapelle's wheelhouse.
Right.
Right.
Now give people a little bit of a sense of Nicolas. Who was Nicolas Jongleur?
Nicolas was basically a gorgeous, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, short firecracker of a kid. He was raised in Burgundy, in Marcinay, a viticultural town, much like the one I'd worked in the South. So, he was a problem child. I think his parents were a little bit special. Maybe they drank. I feel he never really admitted to it, but I feel that his parents were maybe aggressive and maybe drunks. I'm not sure, but it came up over the years with different people that he came from a rough background. And
by the way, like a lot of French chefs, a lot of French chefs came from. Right.
So his first foray into the restaurant business was at the local restaurant. I think he'd moved into. I remember the restaurant was called Joël Perrault, chez Joël Perrault in Marcinay. And he'd worked at Joël Perrault, which I think at that time was 1 or 2 Michelin stars. I believe 1. A very good restaurant in Marcinay. High reputation for the time that it was open. And I think Nicolas worked there for several years, but probably, I would say, from the age of 12.
Yep.
He was very, very skilled. And then after Perrault, he had went to work at Alain Chapelle. And that, still to this day, I read Alain Chapelle menus and I get goosebumps. It's one of the greatest to have ever, cooked or worked in the business. The true poet, the true artist. Nobody,
one of the gods
nobody's
of
come
Nouvelle
close
cuisine.
yet.
Yeah.
Even if they try, he was a vrai paysan, a country boy. And I guess he worked at Alain Chapelle. He started at breakfast. He worked when Ducasse worked there. Like Nicolas was working at Alain Chapelle when Alain Ducasse was working at Alain Chapelle. I think Nicky was in pastry at the time that maybe Ducasse was on fish or meats in the restaurant. He'd worked there for quite a period till maybe, I believe, the year that Chapelle died, and then moved on and basically was hired. He must have been a baby. He must have been 21 or 22. He was hired as chef de cuisine, Georges Blanc. Right. He was at 3 Michelin star, 21 years old,
Right.
A machine.
And
Just a
confidence,
lethal-
amazing confidence.
Yeah. He would say stuff. I remember he would talk about, writing CVs, because one of his favorite things in the kitchen, his favorite joke, was when kids would bring CVs to the restaurant. He would bring them in the kitchen and read them out loud.
Oh my God.
And his favorite was always the end of the CV where it said leisure activities. Right. And he would read out in French. He goes, I like to take walks on the mountain with my girlfriend. I like to watch videos and movies. I like to cook dinner for my family on Sundays. Nicholas would then say, he goes, my CV reads like this. I hate days off.
I hate walking on the mountain with my girlfriend.
No friends. I hate walking with my girlfriend.
On the mountain.
I only want to come to work.
Oh.
Like
Right.
he was quite funny. Right.
Yeah. Note to all chefs on the bottom where it says favorite pastimes, just say, I don't like pastimes. I just like be in the kitchen and work. Right.
Yeah. And then he would obsess with it every day. He would say, David, after work, do you want to go take a walk on the mountain with me? And I'd be like, no, Nicholas, no, I don't.
No.
He goes, David, what are you doing on your day off? He goes, Nicholas, chef, I'm going to sleep and do my laundry. He goes, you sure you don't want to come over and cook a meal for me and my girlfriend? I'm like, no, I don't, chef.
Yeah. He was a personality. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
And he was like, he'd learned this thing that I learned it for a while and I had to unlearn it because it wasn't getting me anywhere. He learned in his apprenticeship, destroy the person up from you and take their job. He goes, if there's a restaurant better than you
Right.
in your immediate vicinity, do everything in your power
To destroy
them. So Nicholas was hell bad. Like he basically, he was at Sintra. He'd figured out that the man in town to beat was Normand. And
Normand Laprise of Tokay, for people who don't know. Yeah.
yeah, Normand Laprise from Tokay. And Nicholas had basically set his sights on destroying Normand.
Right.
And that was it. He talked about it every day. He went to the market when Normand was there and basically would try to outbuy him, would try to buy everything so Normand
All the
couldn't
fish.
have anything.
He'd buy more fish. It all ended up in his freezer, apparently. Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny, you know?
That is so French. Excuse me. But when I worked in France, they would say the same thing. What's the other Michelin-starred restaurant? We got to destroy them. That's really... Is that not the situation today? I'm not so sure.
Honestly, I like it. One of the chefs I respect the most in Montreal is this guy called Claude Pelletier. But when I finally when I kind of moved away from all the working for people, I got my first kind of job. I'd worked at Sue Carver House, of course, but we'll get back to that another day. So I'd worked at Globe, and I'd opened this restaurant called Globe, and it had been bankrupt a couple of times, but I think my dad was sick and I wanted to be close to home and I wanted something easy. And these guys were the first guys ever to say like, hey, do you like money? And I was like, yes.
Sure.
And there was like, oh, here's money. Here's 3 times more money that anyone's ever paid you per week.
Right.
And I was like, okay, I'll work here for a bit because I had nothing. Like I had nothing.
Right.
My whole life fit in a bag.
Right.
In
In France, were you paid? You weren't
2
paid
pairs
in
of
France,
shoes.
were you?
Huh?
In France, were you paid?
I'd be paid, but not really.
Yeah, $100 for a month. Yeah.
Yeah, you get a bit of money here and there, but you'd never have
Crumbs.
Go to a restaurant money.
Oh no.
No, never.
Right.
I wasn't wanting for anything, and to be honest, in retrospect, I was very happy. Right.
Right.
But I got this job offer, and then I really liked the chef Claude Pelletier, and he was running a restaurant right across from me called Mediterraneo. Right. It was very busy. I was empty, and he was full.
I remember.
And I liked him a lot.
Sorry,
I
I should be
respected
laughing.
him, and I thought he was a good. I respect him. I've always respected
It
him.
was
I
a hot
respect him to
restaurant.
this
It was
day.
a hot. It was Claude. It was the ambiance. This is Montreal in the 90s on St. Lawrence Street. These were almost like supper clubs and Mediterraneo. I'm setting the context here.
And
Mediterraneo
all the
was
chefs
across
there were
the street
good.
from
Like
Globe.
Michel Ross was there.
Oh,
Zach
it was a great
Zoul,
restaurant. The food was delicious.
Jeremy Charles.
Yeah,
Marc-Andre Royal.
Yeah,
It was a
yeah.
murderer's row
Right.
of cooks there.
Mark Forgione was there when he was like 18 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of
But
great
one
Montreal
day-
chefs went through that restaurant.
One day, Claude, or a friend, I don't even know if you've even said this, but Claude had said to a friend of mine, he goes, "Who the hell is David McMillan? And he's never going to turn that fucking place around."
Well,
Right?
a little context here. You went into a restaurant called Globe that before was headed by Martin Picard, a Montreal chef famous for au pied de cochon. And Martin didn't really turn it around. And so you walked into a restaurant that was having a lot of hard time.
Third bankruptcy.
There you
right?
go. The hard time.
But it was a beautiful room.
It was a
with
beautiful
good
room.
kitchen.
Lots
I
of
saw
banquettes.
I saw the potential in it, right?
Yeah.
I liked it. The partners were kind of sweet Italian guys. They were really nice to me. I wasn't used to that. I saw that they were unprofessional and they kind of didn't know what they were doing. But they were really good guys. I'm still kind of friends with all of them now, right? They're still Montreal restaurateurs. And, but Claude had said that and it like really hurt my feelings. I remember like it really hurt my feelings.
Right.
Right. And I basically went home and I said, okay, like screw you, hold my beer. Right.
You didn't cry yourself to sleep. No.
I called a friend of mine from Souk Harbor House, Rene Fieger. Rene Fieger, I think, has 2 Michelin stars today in Alsace. And I basically called 3 or 4 of my guys. I fired everyone in the kitchen at Globe, unbeknownst to the owners. Like they went to New York City for a weekend. When they came back, I changed all the menus.
everybody.
I fired the whole kitchen staff. And
You're like the Elon Musk of the Montreal restaurant scene.
it was the Doge of
the Doge, yeah.
Yeah. So I doged the Globe and so I rewrote the menu and I kind of went body after body, right? I'd
Man
stare
on
in
a
the
mission.
dining room
Yep.
and I'd see a table of 2 and I'd overdo it. And then that 2 would turn into 4 and I'd overdo it. And that 4 would turn into 8 and I'd overdo it. And it went pretty quick. I think I got a good review from Helen Rochester. Really, soon after that, I got another review I got a couple of reviews.
Right.
And at that time, I think all the foodies were discovering Eat Gullet and these weird online websites at the infancy of the internet.
Yep. The message boards of the past. Yep.
People were kind of taking note that I was doing things a little bit differently, but I was really taking body by body, I feel.
Okay, I want
it's-
to interrupt here, David, just because I remember these years. There were a
Yeah,
couple
I
of
remember
other
meeting
things.
you out front.
Yeah, I remember that. There were a couple of. First of all, you were always in the dining room. You talked to the customers, and that was not that prevalent in Montreal.
It's because I didn't trust the wait staff.
Well, there you go. You were, but you were also bonding with the customers. Secondly, you were English in a French city, and most chefs in Montreal were not English.
Yeah.
This is a big thing in Montreal because, first of all, there were French chefs from France. Then there were Quebecois chefs, like the great Claude, Normand, these people. You were an Anglophone, and that was different. And a lot of your customers were more of English Montreal, would you say?
Well, I think that's
And
due to,
tourists, a lot of tourists.
I'll always be forever in debt to the Jewish community of Montreal, right? I think the first 2 bodies that I decided to overdo it on was a man called Neil Wyman and his wife. And Neil Wyman told, 6 people from the synagogue that they had a fantastic meal at Globe, and the 6 people said, absolutely, that's not true. I'm still friends with so many of these original 20 customers, Izzy Wiseman and Evie Wiseman, Joe Batat, like all these people, all these nice Jewish people. It took me 6 weeks later. My restaurant
It was full.
of Jews, wall to wall.
Well,
right?
you also had a lot of, no, but yes, but you also
But
had
then the
a
Jews
lot of,
brought the wasps and
Yeah,
and
the
so on.
wasps
And then
came
Les
in.
Stout was there, and
Yeah.
then I was full.
yeah,
Then the people at Mediterraneo
right.
wanted to come to Globe.
Well, right.
And I didn't stop till I was full and Claude was empty.
Well, it was Claude. I think Claude left at one point, to be fair.
No, dude. He was still there. And I remember I would see all the cooks looking through the window at me. I was full. I had 3 valets. And they had 2 tables. And I was like, that's it.
Yeah.
You know, that was like, hate is my friend.
I remember somebody saying to me, the chef at Globe is really weird. I mean, he's really intense, except he watches The Simpsons during the service, during the prep. I'm like, oh, this sounds great. But yeah, you were really competitive. That was for sure, because you even had an argument with a baker who was supplying your bread, who supplied bread to Mediterranean, and you were mad. Like, you were really a man on a mission.
No, I was just thinking, I still believe in that. Like, if I work with you, you don't work with the guy across the street. Right. That's just common sense.
Right.
Like, you can't be the baker at everybody. You just choose your restaurants and serve them well. And that's that. You know?
Right. Well, no, but you were definitely
the baker said, I think it's convenient for me to drop off bread to you and the guy across the street, the same bread.
Right.
I was like, no, dude, what are you doing?
Make different bread at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So Globe, huge success. You also had a lot of celebrities come into Globe. It kind of became the place where when there were movie stars or whatever in town, they would go in there. It was a real scene.
During those years, there was that movie credit, I think. Montreal, the federal government, provincial government had done this like movie credit. I think Hollywood was trying to tax movies. And
they got a tax
Quebec did a smart move, and they said, well, here we're going to not even tax you, but we're going to give you money. Yeah. Plus the Canadian dollar was weaker than the American. So, movie money would go a hell of a lot further here. And of course, there was that Mel fellow from Mel's movies and sets and stuff.
Mel Oppenheim.
Mel Oppenheim had built quite a huge facility and services to facilitate the movie industry. And so I think my second night at Globe, I was cooking for Paul Newman. And he came basically every night to the restaurant, and I spoke with him every night and his wife, and they were super lovely, and they loved Sleeman's beer. We sent him 2 cases of Sleeman's beer to Hollywood. It cost us a fortune to do that, but we did it. I had Nick Nolte one night show up in pajamas from the hotel.
I was there one night, and Jean Reno sat down at another table, the great French actor from The Professional. And he actually was a lot smaller. And I'm like, David, Jean Reno's at the next table. I said, he owns an olive oil plantation, right? Orchard or whatever you go. And then I remember you went over to his table with a bottle of olive oil, and you said, this is the best olive oil in the world. And he's like, no, I make olive oil. And it was a big moment. It was like, these were fun things back in the day. And you'd go to Globe and you'd see something, or something would happen, then it kind of went over crazy. No, it became a little bit crazy at Globe.
No, it was fine.
Grand Prix weekend at Globe.
Yeah, well, Grand Prix was amazing. I'd get to cook for Gene Hackman there. I cooked for they're pretty much name a star. They've been to Globe. Buonanotte was big with the Hollywood crowd as well. If you remember, they had all the plates there. And,
Buonanotte was a restaurant owned by the same
owners
group
as Globe, and it was across the street, but it was Italian trattoria.
Yeah, even more of a party restaurant.
Yeah, Globe was kind of like my cooking, and then of course Fred, my partner at Joe Beef, had joined me at Globe years before. So it was Fred and I working at Globe at that time. And of course, my other partner, Fred's wife, Allison, worked at Globe as well. My future wife worked at Globe, at that time. So we all became friends, and that's at Globe where we started hatching the idea to do other things later, I think what killed that restaurant was what killed many restaurants. What killed many restaurants in New York, what killed many restaurants in Miami is basically the restaurant virus that happened all over North America around the same period, was bottle service.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
When we were doing very well. We were doing at that time, I think $140,000 a week, and we were closed at 11 o'clock. Midnight, restaurant was clean. Everybody was home, safe. The restaurant was, not damaged. It was ready to, do another day tomorrow. And, I was completely against it, and still am to this day. And any restaurant that turns into a club after midnight, we're just not the same people. I have no affinity towards that. You do the restaurant or you're a club. You're not both.
So you afterwards went to a restaurant called Rosalie, also opened by the same group. I remember it well. Great restaurant, beautiful restaurant, the noisiest restaurant I've ever been to in my life.
Yeah, the acoustics were way off.
Acoustics were like, and but then you opened Joe Beef. What year did you open Joe Beef?
I think I left Rosalie and I basically took a year off. I just had Dylan, the baby, Dylan, my first daughter. So 22 years ago, basically, she's 22, and we'd worked. To open that restaurant. And I had this idea of opening a small restaurant with 20 seats. And don't forget at that time, even I think Bourdain even said it at that time, Joe Beef was the canary in the coal mine. There was no such thing, even in New York City, as a 20-seat restaurant. David Chang was the proverbial canary in the coal mine in New York City with the original Momofuku, tiny little space where he worked by himself diligently.
Prune. A lot of people compared Joe Beef to Prune. Gabrielle Hamilton.
Prune was, somewhat the same
East
era.
Village,
but like tiny chef-run restaurant was not a thing that existed at that time.
Right.
We remember one of our, we talked about this before in the press, and we've even told Mark this, but, I think Fred had found an article in Bon Appetit magazine where I think the original Mark Vetri restaurant was like 25 seats, kind of like the original Joe Beef restaurant was. And Mark wanted to remove 4 of the seats to put a meat slicer in, and his father was like, "Are you insane?" And that was a story back in those days when we'd opened Joe Beef that struck a big chord in us, right? We're like, yeah, 25. Yeah. That's what we want to do. Because at that point, I think I was completely traumatized, overworked. Fred had been at Globe for, those really hard bottle service years. And I don't know, we were inspired about, the few stories you would read about tiny restaurants seemed like something more akin. Like we had these skills. We were all confident in our cooking. You can only do so good of a job when you're doing 130, 140, 200, 250. But I was like, imagine if we took our time and did like 25.
Yeah, that original restaurant was so small.
With what we know.
Yeah.
Yeah. With the skills that we it's like, yeah, like we're going to kill it. It's going to be murder. And it's basically that. The first days of Joe Beef was like 25 customers, murder 25 customers. Like, not murder, but 100% of you are leaving stuffed, overfed, ecstatic, and we've been over generous, and we've probably lost money with you. It was just basically take no prisoners every night.
And were you losing money at the beginning? Were you?
Oh, for sure. There was nights absolutely. We didn't draw salaries for a long time. It was, definitely tough. We were lucky at that time. It was, don't forget, and you remember that because you were writing, you'd been writing for a while at this time. You're a well-seasoned food critic by the time I'd opened that restaurant.
I think you opened Joe Beef, in 2005, 4? So I
believe.
I've been writing for about 7 years. I'm not either, and I should remember that. But because I remember reviewing Rosalie, I reviewed Globe. I knew all these places. I remember writing about when you said you were opening Joe Beef, and you said we'll never open a second restaurant. We'll never have more than 25 seats. And a year later, he opens up a restaurant next door. But because it was a huge success from the beginning.
But no, it wasn't really. It was a Montreal restaurant from the beginning. No, and this I
think a lot of your customers followed you from Globe to Joe Beef.
A lot, and a lot. And then we also realized that, for people in Westmount, it was to go to Saint Laurent Street was a big ask. You're taking the boulevard all the way to Saint Laurent Street, try to find parking. And back then, Saint Laurent was getting weird and congested. And, it was weird as hell. There was only antique dealers and Joe Beef on Notre Dame Street back then. So for Westmounters, it was like drive down Atwater, park anywhere, and go to Joe Beef, right? And they'd already had it in their culture to go to Atwater Market and to go to the antique shops. So, it wasn't a big ask to come and see us. And, we hummed along for a couple of years just doing the locals, and I'm very happy, not really making any money, but, surviving. We all had crappy apartments and, we enjoyed going to work, and we had a good thing going. But then I think that, if you remember correctly as a food writer that, the American magazines were still alive at that time.
Absolutely.
But they only went to Quebec City once every 5 years to do a Christmas magazine.
Gourmet magazine used to have, when they did their best restaurants of North America, funnily enough, they always included Montreal. They didn't include Toronto, Vancouver. They always included Montreal.
But that was every 5 years.
But there'd be 3 restaurants. Yeah.
If you could get mentioned, you were lucky, kind of, right?
Yeah.
Getting press back then, again, this is still, I think we have flip phones at this point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And, I think it was David Chang who was starting to rise in his career. He was getting articles in local magazines in New York City, like Time Out and things like that. And he'd said to the press in New York City that the 2 best restaurants he'd eaten at in recent memory was Joe Beef and Noma. Don't forget, nobody knows about Noma back then. Never heard of it.
Right.
Noma was as under the radar as Joe Beef. And then basically it was David Chang's words that unlocked the American media. Within 20 days.
Before Anthony Bourdain.
Oh, way before. Yeah. I think it was due to Chang that Bourdain came, right? Chang basically said, go there, they'll take care of you. They understand. They understand the game.
Right, because Bourdain first came to Montreal when you were still at Globe.
Yeah, sure. And he came to Globe and he hated it because it was a nightclub.
Right.
Well, we knew him. We were friends and stuff. And, but it wasn't for him.
Yeah, I remember all those years so well. Yeah.
And, so after Chang, then we started getting Food and Wine magazine, Bon Appetit magazine, New York Times attention,
the last issue of Gourmet magazine.
Sure. The last issue of Gourmet magazine, I think the last issue, we closed Food and Wine and Gourmet. We did editorials in both of those magazines, right, and I think both of them are their last issues. It's the Joe Beef curse.
No. Right.
And, so I don't know. It was fine. But that's that story for me, came to, we just ran through the thing, right? We just worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. And one day I didn't want to be there anymore. And here we sit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, life goes on. You get older. You want to try different things, But it's funny because when we go back to when we met each other, I met you in front of Globe. And we were talking about Nicolas Jongleur, that chef and I said, yeah, I hear he's completely crazy. And then I remember you standing there saying, Nicolas Jongleur is the greatest chef I've ever known or has ever been known to the world. I said, no, here he's really crazy. So
no, he was a magical cook.
And he was a little nuts. But in an interesting way. And that was the first time we met. So already there was a bit of conflict there of not agreeing on something. But, it was a long time ago. But it was on the street in front of Globe. And I also heard from somebody else saying there's this Anglophone chef. And for people to know, in Montreal, like I said before, all the chefs were French. I'm like, an Anglophone chef? Like, what? There really were none. Think about it. Who were the English chefs?
James McGuire.
From the States, Jean Cordeau from England. There were people
I thought he was French.
Who were not local, So, yeah, okay, they came in from elsewhere. But really, a local chef who was English speaking originally, I'm like, wow, I had also been to France on stage. I'm like, you had been to France on stage. There were a lot of people that we didn't like in common, as much as we had a fight the first time we met on that sidewalk.
I didn't feel it was a fight. You probably just hated me. Like
no. It was not. I just didn't agree with you because. But I ended up really liking Nicolas a lot. And for people who don't know, Nicolas sadly committed suicide. I believe in 1998. And it was a big loss for Montreal, and for anybody who never ate at his table in Montreal, I think you really missed some of the greatest meals that this city has ever seen. And he really missed that big moment for restaurants to be on big lists or to get a lot of media attention because he did a little bit, certainly locally, but it's sad that he ended his life because he really is one of the greats. But he had a tough life.
One of the greatest things that Nicolas ever taught me, he goes, was your job doesn't stop in the kitchen. You have to control everything. From the sidewalk outside, you sweep the sidewalk, you shovel that sidewalk till it's scraped to the cement. You make sure there's no cigarette butts within even, 2 businesses over on each side. And you control the dining room, the tables, the chairs, nobody else but you. The wine list is your responsibility. The cocktail list is your responsibility. You're the chef. He goes, it's not a dining room manager who decides anything. And the sommelier is not, today the sommelier seems important.
Right.
Nicolas said, sommelier works for me and does what I say. And that's how that goes.
Right.
Sommelier is not this rogue element in the dining room doing whatever he wants. Nicolas treated sommeliers the same way that he would treat an appetizer chef. It was just another tool, right? And even the owner for Nicolas, the person who paid for the restaurant was a tool to him. It wasn't, I don't care if you paid for the restaurant. Nicolas's attitude was always, I'll leave right now.
Right.
If everything is not exactly how I want it, I'm leaving.
I think some of the owners were afraid of him, to be honest.
Yeah. But I took that on as well. And I think, Fred, by the way, worked at Nicolas, and all of us anybody, Stelio, who has a book out now, William Frachot, who has 2 Michelin stars in Dijon, worked for him. A lot of great cooks worked for Nicolas, and all the cooks that left working for Nicolas were also learned to control the way the table looks, the plates, the glasses, the
bathrooms,
the bathrooms. Nicolas was as obsessed as what we did in the kitchen, as what was going on in the dining room, as what the waiters were wearing, as the tone of the inclination of their voice. If they said je, tu, I remember, good God, one night a waiter, a very good waiter, Nicolas was just walking and saw the waiter put his hand on the shoulder of the customer. he went dark.
Right.
He said, "Who do you think you are? You
piece of shit.
Yeah, you pig. You're a waiter.
You touched the customer.
He's like, you're basically, if I could hire a forklift to bring the plates from the kitchen to the table, I would.
God.
And you're beneath that."
Right.
He goes, if I ever see you touch a customer with your disgusting waiter hands, I was like, whoa,
Ooh, yeah.
But there's a method to that madness, because you say that once,
You'll never do it again,
right? Or you can kind of like remind nicely the waiters and your team not to touch the customers every night forever, right?
You're right. Yeah. But that is actually a common theme with great chefs, is this extreme obsessive nature. Charlie Trotter's waiters apparently had tape on the bottom of their shoes to pick up any fuzz on the carpet. I can't imagine that there was ever a blocked toilet at Charlie Trotter's, or ever a waiter touching a customer. This is the level of extreme greatness of some of these chefs.
Nicholas told me once, he said, I'm going to show you this, okay, right now. I'm going to show you how to clean a toilet once.
Right.
Watch how I clean a toilet. The way that I clean a toilet should be the way that you clean a toilet now for the rest of your life. Like, I would clean a toilet up to that moment.
Pretty well.
With a couple of Scott towels and a little bit of Windex. Nicholas would have a bucket of water with a sponge and another bucket of water with another sponge and a roll of Scott towels and cold bleach in water with no soap. And he would put newspaper down. So, cause he was getting down on his knees.
Right.
Okay. And he was getting underneath that toilet bowl, and he had a toilet bowl brush.
Yep. Because
he would remove the caps on the screws and clean them with the brush, put them back. He'd be lying on the toilet bowl, and then after that was the second soap. Then it was the bleaching rinse. Then it was, and I was like, okay, I get it. And you know what? I still clean toilets like that.
Well, I mean, this is what we're,
So I'm going to show you once how to mop the kitchen. Again, I would kind of use the dirty mop water, because I'd worked in lesser restaurants. Right. I'd use the mop water that was there. Nicholas would empty the mop water,
right?
Wash the mop bucket with steel wool, so the mop bucket looked new.
Right.
Put a new mop head on.
Right.
Right. Then get the other mop bucket. So we had 2 mop buckets, right? And it was a whole thing.
That's a 3 Michelin star chef, damn it.
Yes, it was a 3 Michelin star mopping of the kitchen.
You want 3 Michelin stars, you better clean your goddamn toilet properly, because it ain't going to happen. Yeah. I don't know. It was great days with him, maybe his obsessions took it too far eventually. I don't know, but great loss.
I remember, I'll tell you one last story about Nicholas, just to, and any cooks listening to this, and I've told this story. Maybe a handful of people have heard it, but I've never said it. Let's say on a podcast or in an interview. But Nicholas was furious one day because the owner of the restaurant had taken a brunch on a Friday morning, I believe, or a Saturday morning at the restaurant for a modeling agency. Now, Nicholas was very excited that models were coming to the restaurant, and he told us about all the things he was going to do to the models and how he was going to date them all.
Oh my God.
Because being a very immature Frenchman with,
Right.
he was a bit of a moron. And, but I said, chef, should I order, croissants and chocolatine? And he looked at me with disgust.
Right.
And he goes,
Order?
From who? Everything here, David, in your country, it's garbage.
Right.
He goes, there's not one. He goes, I've been here for 4 years now, and I've never had one croissant viennoiserie that's any good. And he goes, so Nicholas, that's cool, but it's 4, and we're back here at 5 tomorrow morning.
Right.
And the brunch starts at 9:30, and we need 150 viennoiserie.
Right.
And he goes, no, I'm going to make them right now. That's why the butter's there.
Right.
I was like, okay, what? So service begins for me. I was working with Alex Roland. We were a 2-man kitchen back then with a dishwasher who helped us. So we start service, and Nicholas is kind of talking on his phone, going outside for a cigarette. Mm-hmm. Eventually, I see him in the corner of the kitchen, puts on his apron, and I see him start dishing, no scale.
Right.
Okay. No, nothing.
Right.
He starts throwing flour on the table and, water, a little bit of this and that. And, again, no scale. I never saw the scale come out. I never saw nothing. I just watched him. And then he has a big dough, and then the butter comes out. He's pounding the butter, perfect square. And then he starts folding the butter into the dough. Then he goes, puts it in the fridge, then he goes for a cigarette, then he disappears for another 10 minutes, and he folds again, he comes back, and he keeps on doing this thing during service. Then, basically, it was an early night that night. I think we'd done a few customers, like not many, but like 20, 30 customers. And he pulls everything out. He lays out onto the bigger table, and he cuts. He rolls it out by hand. No cutter machine with the lines and the wheels.
Nope.
He rolls this dough out. He cuts all the corners. He makes all his squares. He rolls out 100 croissants and 50 chocolatines. There was not 152. Okay? There was no extra dough except for the edges for the square.
Right.
And I was like, I look over at Alex and I go,
what the fuck?
he just made 100 croissants. Okay? He just made 100 croissants without a recipe, without using a scale.
Right.
Okay?
No ruler.
And 50 chocolateries, no ruler.
Right.
No laminoir.
No.
They're like, do you understand what that is? Alex was like, yeah, I've been watching out of the corner of my eyes. I've been like, and I was just like, okay.
Right.
We
are not worthy.
He is not, he is not from us. Right. And we'd have to choose our questions lightly, because I know that if I asked him at that moment, he would have, because of his character and how he would have just gloated and told me how amazing he was for 3 hours.
Better not to mention it.
I just chose, but I knew that the next day, we'd done the event, and by the way, the croissants were the best I've ever had to this day. When you there's an extra spin on the end, and the points are like super crispy and crunchy,
Yep.
but the croissant's big in the middle.
Yep.
That one, that particular, you see it even rarely in Paris anymore, but that particular croissant with the very pinched tips, right? That's high art, croissant making with the pinched tips. And I said, just why is that? And he goes, when I left Perrault, they wouldn't give me a job at Alain Chapelle. So I worked with this guy called Jeannot, and Jeannot is supposed this famous pastry chef who worked with Alain Ducasse, with Alain Chapelle forever. And he goes, I had to wake up every morning at 3.
Yeah.
Okay. And I had to look at the reservations in the inn and the outside reservations. And I'd have to count the croissants for 2 per person, right? Plus 6 for the chef. And then I'd go into the laboratoire de pâtisserie, and I'd have to make all the viennoiserie, and it would all have to be ready for 6 a.m.
Oh yeah.
And I go, I did that for 5 years. I go, you woke up at 3 a.m. for 5 years and made viennoiserie for the people in the inn, the chef, and the extra reservations every day. He goes, yeah.
I started when I was 12.
Yeah. I said, so he goes, I needed a recipe for the first year. And after that.
Yeah.
And then I said, chef, when was the last time you made croissants?
5 years ago.
And he was like, it was 8 years ago. He goes, you haven't made croissants for 8 years, but you made 100 perfect croissants and 50. He goes, yeah, it's in me.
It's like riding a bike. Yeah.
I was like, that's, so then, that was kind of the measure that I've measured all.
Great chefs.
Yeah. I was just like, sure, whatever. Say what you want. You can say whatever you want. You can have as many awards as you want.
Right.
I know that I've worked for people that
absolutely
you have no idea.
The dexterity.
Your ex-husband's one of those guys, by the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I the first time he made a puff pastry is whistling, just piles a bunch of flour on the counter, makes the most perfect puff pastry ever, because he worked for a chef who said, you better make the best puff pastry ever. And, he was up to the challenge, and you can do it in his sleep. But, when you start when you're 14 years old, and your parents are pastry chefs, and that's why you see a lot of great French chefs who are just beyond the beyond. And you're right. They're not getting awards. Nobody knows their name. They've done it forever, Although I think you're seeing less and less of that. I mean, first of all, they're not starting when they're 14 anymore, but.
It's rare now that you have these things. It's like great skill. Today it's like the great junk food war, I feel. I see on Instagram is like there's so much pizza and so much square pizza and like God, let's take a fucking how many chili fucking Philly cheesesteak posts can you see?
Absolutely.
But when I think about
yeah,
remember James McGuire's quiche Lorraine at Passepartout?
His puff pastry is his everything. His purist.
But it was like it was a million. It was what is it? How thin was that thing? It was a quiche. It was 3 millimeters thick, right? The lardons were brilliant or perfect.
I think also it's a matter of
cream. What was that cream and egg? It was barely set. It was like a quiche creme brulee of lardon. But that was one of the great things that I've put in my mouth in my life.
But I think this is also a matter of chefs who are really, as we say in French, maîtriser, or mastering something instead of constantly trying to go off in different directions. I mean, if you look at French chefs for so long, if you take a French pastry chef who's doing classical French pastries, you can spend your whole life. It's a bit like a sushi chef. You can spend your whole life making the perfect eclair, or you could try to reinvent a million things and not do it as well. So there's a huge emphasis on technique and getting things right and constantly doing better instead of just saying, okay, I've done this, now I'm going to move on. If you're constantly trying to make the best quiche or the best whatever, yes, you will hit that level of greatness. But if you always just want to move on to the next thing, you won't.
Yeah, you become good at a bunch of stuff, but not great at anything.
Right. Absolutely. And that can go for actually any profession. It's not even cooking,
I always said, learn 15 appetizers inside out, 5, 6 fish, 10 meats, 4 desserts, and just do that for the rest of your career.
Even people who cook at home.
Don't do pop-ups. Don't do special events. Don't go on chef competition TV shows. Just stay in your restaurant, watch The Simpsons on the television while you do prep, and do your job every day, the day in, day out. Avoid the smoke, avoid the mirrors, focus on your thing. I say that now, but of course,
At the time.
I wish that
You were putting pineapple on things at one point.
I have no regrets about my pineapple days, Lesley.
Look, I'll even eat pineapple on pizza. I think if anything is well done, why not? If it works, it's great. If it doesn't work,
we did all this work on this podcast just to have the comment section fill up with food critic Lesley Chesterman says pineapples on pizza is okay. McMillan disagrees.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm all for it. I'm all for some good. It has to be a good pineapple though, not just a shitty pineapple. It better be a really good pineapple. Yeah, but these, it's funny because talking about all this stuff, we are two people. I'm a little older than you are, but I mean, and it's kind of sucks to always look back and say, oh, this was great and this was great. But we did both kind of grow up at this moment in this city, and even doing apprenticeships in France or doing these things that were, I wonder if chefs are going through the same kind of golden moment that I think we saw at the time. One huge regret I had when I was a pastry chef is that we took no pictures of anything we did. And so all these people posting, their toast, their breakfast on Instagram. And I'm like, I never took a picture of anything I made. I mean, I maybe have 3 pictures.
It's funny. You're super right. Look at this. I spoke about this, maybe with you, text message really recently, but the only recorded part of my career is kind of Joe Beef has a footprint on social media, right? Mm. They go on, my ex-partners go on to, run a successful business of those restaurants. I was happy to sell them. I'm happy that they're in good hands. It's all great. But I had a whole other career.
Right.
Pre that restaurant, right?
And pre-social media.
There's no
record of Globe.
According to Instagram, Nicolas Jongler doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
James McGuire does not exist on Instagram.
Right.
David Waltuck was a Chanterelle restaurant in New York City, did not exist. An American place by Larry Forgione doesn't exist.
Right.
It sucks a little bit.
Andre Soltner.
It's like recorded history.
Yep.
The recorded history for the new recorded history of food began with Instagram.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
This gorgeous meal, some of the best meals of my life,
Yeah.
And maybe the best cooking that I've done with my friends, and I think the best cooking that a lot of my colleagues have done is before recorded history.
Oh, absolutely. And when you look at old cookbooks, sometimes they're amazing and you see beautiful photography, and sometimes you see a great chef who had a crappy photographer, and their book it really doesn't even reflect how great their food was at the time.
Yeah.
So, no, it's a good time though. But I do regret that there weren't more pictures back then. But we didn't even take a camera. I mean, there was none of that. Just none of that. Anyway, so David, I have a question for you. As somebody who was in the great or not so great position of having to review your restaurants over the years, especially because I knew you as a friend first before I had to review you, which I never enjoyed, but honestly, I was always up to the task because I would kind of pretend that didn't exist, that relationship. What was your feeling about being reviewed? Because also, you did get reviewed a lot later on, but you know the local reviews that I wrote for the Montreal Gazette and then also came in La Presse were some of the first reviews. So how did it feel for you to be reviewed?
Well, you know, being reviewed, it's a weird thing, right? Getting reviewed. First of all, let's open that can up a little bit. No, but for real.
I agree.
First of all, you know, I think, you know, yes, we were friends, but I believe that we communicated properly, said like, I'm working, are you working? Right? And you'd say, yes, I'm working. Then I would go to work, right? I would do my job. Hopefully you liked it or you didn't, whatever, you know. And generally, I know that I cooked fairly well or our team cooked well or, you know, and I knew that we'd do okay. You know, but sometimes you don't know, like if there's a rock in the clam, you know, something like that, whatever. But let's open that up, the reviewing part, because I have thoughts on that. It's like, how many jobs do you get reviewed in, you know, at under the age of 30 by your first name in the Saturday newspaper?
Right.
It sucks, first of all. Okay, to be honest, even when you get a good review, it's a bit traumatic. Like I was starting to get reviewed, you know, when I was 20 something years old. Right. And, you know, my mom would be calling me because the neighbors would be calling her and this and that. Like, you know, I found that a bit much, you know, and then I can only imagine when like, you know, you're 24 years old and you get a really bad review.
Yeah.
These are, you know, traumatic events sometimes, right? Because, you know, doctors don't get reviewed in the Saturday Gazette with a full page spread and their picture and rated on 4 stars. You know, lawyers don't get that treatment. I think the, you know, only other people that get a true beating in the press.
Well, musicians. Actors
and
movies,
musicians, actors, and the politicians,
right? Oh, yeah,
and chefs,
right?
And I was like, I don't know. That's like, and sometimes I wondered, that's a lot of pressure to put on the kids a little bit. Sometimes I have found that, you know, some reviews that I got early on in my career, they're mean spirited. They would hang with me for years. You know, I found that rough. You know. And always too, you know, in the back of my head, it was always like, fuck, I'm being reviewed by basically a woman who could never even cook at, you know, 5% of my ability. You know, it's difficult to take criticism from Françoise Keller or...
Just for people who are listening, Françoise Keller was a francophone French restaurant critic for La Presse from about the early 70s until she passed away about 15 years ago, just to let you know. Alsatian woman who actually was asked to be a restaurant critic by her editors because she was from France and because she was a woman. She didn't really want to do it. They handed her the job. And in her defense, I think she did a lot of things really well, which is, for instance, she really went out in the province and found a lot of producers, a lot of chefs who she really wrote about. So she gave a lot of exposure to a lot of people outside of the city. She could be a really tough critic, and she wrote quite short reviews that it was either all or nothing, I think, with her.
Yeah, sure. But yeah, listen, I don't disrespect her as a person and her body of work. And, you know, there's no, I harbor no ill feelings. But, you know, I remember those more than being like, they didn't roll off my back like they didn't roll off my back like water off a duck's back, right? They were, you know, they stuck with me. They hurt a little bit. They stung, you know? And then even when a critic would come in, it was very positive. That would basically affect the goings on of the restaurant. It's one thing you're used to doing it, a certain amount of people every night. Everything's going well. Your team is good. And then you get a really good review and all of a sudden you're way too busy and the phone won't stop ringing. And that also sucks. I hate to say it. It's good for business, but it's really hard to adapt a business going from in mathematical terms, like $60,000 a week in sales to $120,000 a week in sales. And all of a sudden, 7 days later, I'm doing twice the amount of people that I was doing. And there's a percentage of those people that are there to watch you fail.
Absolutely. You're
We'll
right.
see.
Good point.
We'll see if
Exactly.
Lesley Chesterman was right about this.
Yeah.
I disagree with her on your veal blanquette. I'm like, okay, sure. Like, God, what a nightmare this is all of a sudden. This positive review
Right.
is turning into sour
nightmare.
grapes for me.
Right.
Yeah. Because all these people are here to basically, we're here to
Yeah.
test
Oh,
you.
yeah.
We don't believe that. I'm like, who goes to the restaurant to test people? Can't you just come with your partner and have a nice dinner out?
You told me that they would also often order the exact same meal that we would write about in the reviews.
Yeah.
Like rabbit. I think at Globe, I ate the rabbit. You're like, I don't know how much rabbit we've sold this week, but people would follow the review.
Yeah. That's pretty standard practice for any review. How did you feel about reviewing restaurants though? What were your positives and negatives about it? I got reviewed, but generally I was also working and not super concerned about it, right? And when you do get reviewed, it's like once or twice a year by 3 or 4 different people, right? It's not much. You can deal with it. The actual day-to-day job of a restaurateur is a fucking nightmare, right? Everything's a nightmare, right? The dish pit, a whole bunch of
The
stuff.
grease trap.
Everything,
Right.
on and on and on. Just, staff, maintenance, whatever, products not coming in, the truck's stuck, the city's construction, the list goes on forever. It's always, looking back on my career, my things, right? But you've reviewed how many restaurants?
I wrote over 1,000 reviews in 20 years. But I was
Now, how many of them bring conflict to you?
None. I would not rewrite one word of any review. There's no regrets, none. Because I really thought hard. We wrote very long reviews back in the day. And I really always took this job very seriously. I never gave a friend a good review because they were a friend. I never gave somebody I didn't like a bad review because I didn't like them. Quite the opposite. I lost friends and gained a lot of enemies along the way. But
I've not spoken to you for a couple of years here and there.
David and I, but not over reviews, over other things. But I think that I think it's an extreme privilege to be able
I
to
believe
be a
I've been
restaurant
mad at
reviewer.
you for writing
A review?
Yeah, I think I forget, and we've discussed
Over
this
a review?
privately about our ups and downs. But I remember being really upset about the review you gave to John Winter Russell
Oh, about somebody
back in
else's
the day.
review.
I remember she's out of line. That's not okay.
Oh, not about you,
You know?
being reviewed. Right.
No, not about me being reviewed, but I remember being angry at you for
other people's
reviewing.
reviews.
Yeah. Sometimes I'd be happy when they got a good one, and then there'd be some kids that I'd be like, wow, this kid's really working outside the box here.
Yeah. I think.
John's
Right.
really setting himself up. I believe in what he's doing.
Right.
I understand from where it's coming from. Okay. I see his vision. I go, it's weird. It's like, wanting to do abstract paintings and only making them white.
Right.
You're alone up there doing white abstract paintings, But I did appreciate the art of him a little bit,
Is this a Candide you're talking about?
Candide, yes.
Okay. So the
So
thing.
Candide is go ahead.
Yeah. The thing is about a situation like that is that when you walk into a restaurant, and I stand by this completely, is you walk into every restaurant hopeful that it'll be a 4-star night. You never walk into a restaurant as a reviewer, I never did, thinking this won't be good. So the thing is that people have a lot of vision of a restaurant that they went, or this is what they think it's like, but you're not sitting next to me as it's happening. And one
Yeah, I
thing
get that.
as a restaurant critic that I will say, and I'm sure all restaurant critics, you are actually only really writing what happened to you that night. You were only writing about the food that was served to you. Now, there were people who will say, you should have gone 3 or 4 times, whatever, you should have gone. At the point that I was reviewing, and this is the same for any reviewer in Montreal at the time, it's different in New York, LA, I'm sure, but we only had a certain amount of money to eat out in restaurants. So we were not given enough money by our newspapers to eat out 3 or 4 times like people say you should, even twice. Sometimes I'd go twice.
I don't think that's realistic, to be honest. I see what the New York Times is doing right now with these, like, we visited a total of 5 times and had 72 dishes. That's crazy. Just go once.
Yeah, well, it's nice that they went many times. And at the beginning, when I was a restaurant reviewer, I paid out of my own pocket for the second visit, sometimes 3 visits. Now, that night at Candide, I didn't have a good meal. We had a lot of wine. There was a lot of ice at the entranceway I remember one of the reasons that the chef was angry with me is they said I didn't have wheelchair access. If anybody could get into that restaurant that night with a wheelchair, I would never recommend it. There was so much ice near the front of the restaurant. My meal was very lackluster, was expensive, but it wasn't only that. And I actually took pictures of all of my food and I showed it to a lot of people and I said, tell me if I'm wrong here. So he may have a vision. He may have this. This goes for all chefs. But what is on the plate is what the customer is getting and what the critic is getting. And I can only review what is being served to me. And that night, my meal was not good. There's another thing about restaurant critics that people don't realize is that we're going to all the restaurants in the city. So a lot of chefs, when they have a friend who's a chef or they know a chef, I go everywhere. So I knew what was being done elsewhere. So when you're, let's say, awarding stars to restaurants, you know that this place has a higher standard or this place has a higher standard. And that's one thing I love about restaurant reviews and really good critics is they are establishing a hierarchy of restaurants in a city. So, as much as a restaurant reviewer can say, a chef can say, I hate restaurant reviews. What we're doing a little bit is we're kind of saying, this place is really great. This place is really good. This place, you may be disappointed. I can't go to a restaurant like I did at Candide that night and say, I had a meal that was fantastic if I didn't. Because what happens if a reader then goes and says, what the hell? We trust you. There's a huge element of trust with restaurant reviewers. You really can't recommend a restaurant that you don't believe in. And that night, the dinner that I had a great sommelier, I had some great natural wines, and I had some really mediocre food. So that's all I can write about. So you know what? If that makes people angry, so be it. That's my job. That was my job. And I took it very seriously. So I remember when I went to Joe Beef, I remember the second time, the first time I went to Joe Beef, it was still very small and new. I think you got 3 stars. There was something, I can't even remember really why it wasn't 4, but no restaurant their first review should be 4 stars. No restaurant should get 2 Michelin or 3 Michelin stars. These are things you should build up to, I think. That's how it works in France. That's how a lot of people, unless you really open up with a bang and a lot of money and a great chef, okay, that can happen too. But the second time I reviewed you, I walked in, I was actually with my boss, and David looked like he wanted to kill me. Like, the restaurant was packed, it was hot that night, everything, and he's like, no, And I sit down, I do my job, and I felt pressure that night. I'm like, shit, he doesn't want me to be here. He's giving me the evil eye. And yet I had such a great dinner. Every dish that was set in front of me was perfectly seasoned, was a great portion, was interesting, was absolutely delicious. And that's all I'm looking for. I'm looking for dinner that is delicious.
That was Marco Frappier, that kid, that most of that cooking.
Absolutely. Well,
one of the greatest chefs in Canada, probably the greatest chef in Canada, Marc Olivier.
You were glaring at me with your hands around your neck like you wanted to strangle me. You know what? All that didn't matter because...
Well, there's these small permissions I would allow myself, because, I knew you were working, but we're still friends, so I can give you a dirty, an uncomfortable, I'm going to strangle you glance once in a while.
Right. But you know what?
I wouldn't do that to...
But you know what? If that dinner that night wasn't great, you wouldn't have gotten 4 stars. That dinner that night was great. The ambiance was great. The service was great. The wine. And you know what? It's funny because I got a call after that restaurant review came out from another critic. I will not mention who it was. And they said, you're crazy. Joe Beef is not a 4-star restaurant. And I'm like, I stand by that review. I think it's a 4-star restaurant. And then
Who
like,
said that?
I'll tell you later. But you know, and I think 2 years later, you were on the world's 50 best list. You know, I'm sorry, but I don't want to say but I really I thought this restaurant can't get any better. It's great. It was great, you know, and it's, I haven't been lately, but I'm sure it's still great.
Oh, it's a great restaurant.
And
I hear all the time. Everybody, how can I say? There's always a story. Oh, it's not the same. Like, listen, like I hear constantly, it's a great restaurant. I know people, I have friends who work there. The standards are high. They, you know, just because I left doesn't mean anything should happen. Fred's one of the most talented cooks I've ever worked with. That's a solid team. You know, it's a very good restaurant, probably even better than when I was there. You know,
I'll have to go.
Refocused energy and, you know,
right.
I have zero issue with them.
But you see this not concept, but the reality is you really only can write about what's on your plate. You can't invent stuff. You can't say something was better than it was. You can't say something was worse than it was. All you have to work with is what's on your plate. I think any restaurant critic would agree. And if they don't agree, then they're bullshit artists, because really you're not supposed to be writing. You're not there to help your friends. You're there for the reader, you know?
So we'll agree that, you know, you're basically a long form, old school, you know, newspaper food critic.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the 20-something-year-old millennial Instagram food reviewer / influencer that we get to deal with on, you know, what has food reviewing turned into right now, and how low can we go?
Yeah. Well, like you, I went to cooking school. I went in when I was 19 years old. I did 3 years at we went to the same cooking school called the ITHQ, which is the Institut d'Hôtellerie Tourisme du Québec, for people who don't know. It's a very good cooking school here in Quebec. It was free back then, which is another topic. But, so I was a pastry chef. I worked in France. I did 2 stages. I worked in Michelin star restaurants. So I was a cooking teacher for a long time. I worked as a chef for a long time. I had a lot of hard people to work with, a lot of discipline.
I think everybody who's a cook knows that you can cook, Lesley. And
no, but I'm going to get to, So what I'm getting to is that today, my big complaint, and, you know, a lot of people say I'm full of shit, but I stand by it, is that I think a lot of people are very glib with the way they treat restaurants. I think a lot of people think, this is so yummy. This is so good. I think it has to come from a deeper place than yummy or good, because, you know, a lot of people can say that. I think you need a little bit of food knowledge to criticize a restaurant, first of all. And, you know, maybe you need less food knowledge to say something is delicious. But if you're going to destroy or say this is not a good restaurant to go to, I think you need a little bit of experience to say that, because you are affecting somebody's business. And, you know, you get back to when you said you didn't like the reviews by Françoise Keller. What does a restaurateur think today when they see an influencer saying, this place is like really cool, but it's just like so not my thing? You know, I look, a lot of them do great videos and stuff, but on the other hand, it's just a little bit too shallow what I'm hearing. I would like to hear something with a little bit of thought behind it. That's all. You know, I'm not saying they've got to churn out a 1,500 word review on a Substack. I'm saying that maybe it could just be a little deeper.
I believe it's out there probably. I just haven't come across it yet, but I think there's a way to doing these like short Instagram reviews with a little bit of class and substance and a little bit of a intellect with less fluff. I think there's a way of doing it. I just haven't seen it yet. One of my favorite restaurants in Montreal is, and of course, like, one of my favorite people, the brothers Shore, Ari and Pablito. They run a great little restaurant there, Beba. And I saw this one Instagram little critique this weekend where I was like, oh, so we check out this new hot restaurant and, it's called Beba. It's on it's on Canada's top 10 list. It's number 8. Anyway. And then, they do this beautiful course of mackerel that's served, I think it's like brined. Yeah. the mackerel came out, but that wasn't for me. And like, out of like five, the 6 or 7 courses that you eat when you go to Beba,
Right.
like,
why even mention it?
2 of the courses, like, it was too, like, dude, if mackerel on a crouton is like too weird for you, like, maybe you should not be reviewing, like, this is also, it's insanely disrespectful, right? It's like mackerel flown in from Toyosu Market in Japan. He works hard at that dish. It's just not easily available. There's a lot of thought process and logistics into making that dish happen 5 nights a week at apex, freshness. And to just be like dismissed by a girl talking with vocal fry, I was like, no, this hurts to watch.
I saw one of Mon Lapin. They're like, I couldn't recommend this restaurant. And you're like, what?
I think you got in a fight with her a little bit.
Yeah, because, that is a very glib way of saying, oh, and I'm an influencer. I do this for a living, but you're just going to be careful when you're telling people not to go to a restaurant. There's a lot there. And I've done it for a long time and I took it very seriously. And you have to have some reasons besides, I didn't like it, to say to people not to go to a restaurant. Even if the restaurant is full every night, it's not good. It's not good. I still think restaurant reviews are great. I understand why they don't exist anymore. I understand why a lot of chefs want to murder restaurant reviewers. I think a lot of restaurants are a little bit in denial. I once had a restaurant owner call me up screaming at me because I didn't give him a 4-star review. I gave him a 1-star review. It was a really bad old school Italian restaurant. The man was not very happy. He thought he had a 4-star restaurant. Okay, more power to him. That's his opinion. So there are a lot of people who don't know. There are a lot of restaurant owners who don't even go out and eat in other restaurants. There are a lot of chefs who don't go out and they don't know what's going on in their own city. So, there is a little bit of a standard.
I know a ton of chefs who like haven't
expensive.
Haven't been seen in a restaurant in 20 years.
I understand why they don't. But, on the other hand, be careful by saying, I should have a 4-star restaurant if you've never been to a 4-star restaurant, if you don't know what that level could be. Maybe you could get better instead of yelling at somebody. I once had an owner of a restaurant threaten to kill me on the phone. Okay. So he calls me up. This is my first year reviewing. He says, I'm going to blow up your car. I'm going to kill your dog and I'm going to burn down your house. And I'm like, all of that because I gave you a 1-star review and you are a totally crappy restaurant in St. Catherine Street. It was so bad that at the end we talked to the waiter and I said, which of the desserts are, what would you recommend? He said, well, none of them are homemade. And it says homemade sorbet, homemade apple pie. He's like, no, we buy them all. And I'm like, even your waiter is telling me your restaurant is shitty, It's and so you're going to call me up when you've had a bottle of wine too many and threaten to kill me, because you think you have a 4-star restaurant. So anyway, it's something I'm glad I don't do full time anymore, but there were some really, a lot of people I think are in denial. You take a step back. Also, a restaurant review can be a great opportunity for a chef to maybe see what needs to be fixed. If I go to a certain hot restaurant downtown and I go to the bathroom and all the toilets are clogged up with toilet paper on the floor, well, we go back to Nicolas Jongleur cleaning the toilets. What does that tell me about this restaurant? It tells me they don't give a shit about the quality of their bathrooms, and yet they're serving, a veal chop for $65 upstairs. There's something wrong there.
Yeah, I agree completely.
It
is difficult. One of the hardest things to watch is like, restaurants that I actually enjoy and chefs and restaurateurs that I respect and are my friends and I enjoy. And because of the lack, like the Devoir doesn't really review, the Price doesn't review, like that jaunt is gone. It's finished.
Right.
So now we have basically pandering to this like basically bottom feeder Instagram kind of influencers that have no real substance. It's difficult to watch. Yeah,
and I've even heard a lot of restaurant owners say that they miss the old days of getting reviewed. staying up late for the newspaper to come out and waiting for that review to hit and see what happens, be it good or bad.
I love that. I missed that.
Yeah, you see?
That was a lot of fun.
A lot
There's
of them
a tradition to it. It became a tradition, I like the Michelin Guide coming to Montreal. That's going to be cool. That's going to be eventful to watch.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to talk about that when it comes out. No,
that's a whole. We're not going to talk about it today, but that'll be an episode.
It'll be an episode for sure. Please don't forget to subscribe to the Salt Lake Podcast with David McMillan and me, Lesley Chesterman, on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. And while you're there, please give us 5 stars if you've enjoyed the show today, or share the episode on your social media channels. Every bit helps, especially at the beginning, as we get this project off the ground.
Special thanks to our media producers at TNKR Media, executive producer Dan Delmar. We'll see you next time on the Salt Lake Podcast with David McMillan and Lesley Chesterman. Thank you so much for listening.
ThinkBait, TNKR Media. Good talk.